Let's go ahead and get started here. Class being what it will be today, we may be done a bit early. I say that a lot and then I run out of material, but it feels like today I had 13 short verses to cover, and I asked Brian and Lawrence to send me their material, and I messed up. And I only asked for the last two classes. They both taught this last time, and they didn't volunteer me any information for this class. So you just get stuck with my stuff, and there's not really a ton of information in chapter 8 here, so we'll cover that here. But I do want to do a little bit of review. I think it's just one of the things that I always tend to do as a teacher. I can't keep my mouth shut. So we'll talk about a few things here. But as we look here, really, when we get into chapter 8, this is really the culmination of what I called the first 7 here. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So what has been the focus of the past 3 chapters? Chapters 5 through 7.
The opening of the seals.
The opening of the scroll. That's right. Okay? So the opening of the scroll has been that first thing we saw there. Chapter 5 verse 1 began right out with, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals." And I don't remember them talking a lot about this, but what's a seal? When we think about, there's lots of seals, and I'm talking about the kind, okay? I shouldn't have done that, that's on camera. What's that?
Could be authority.
Okay, authority. Today we talk about whenever you stamp something perhaps with a seal, or you get a document with a seal on it, it has authority, okay? The authority of that person, the great seal of Kentucky, whenever you have a official document will have that kind of stamp on it, or that seal. But more specifically to a scroll, what would a seal have been?
Closure.
A what?
Closure.
A closure, that's right. Something to keep it closed. So typically we would say a bit of clay, a bit of welted wax, or sometimes even metal. Today we still do seals with lead, right? If you've ever worked in the shipping industry, and when you seal up a container to get shipped overseas, or even sometimes just to get shipped within the United States, depending on what it's in, a lot of times they'll just take a piece of wire, wrap it around the lock, and then just a piece of lead, and clamp it there with a special seal that has the authority of the person who sealed it there, okay? And that is considered sealed. Is it really sealed? Like to stop you from opening it? No. I mean, anybody can just rip that open, okay? Same thing when we would look at the idea of a scroll. Sometimes, especially when you get into Roman times, some of the seals became actual locks, where you had to have a key to get into it. But most often it was just clay or wax or a piece of lead, something that you could melt at relatively low temperature that would not damage the scroll. Now sometimes that idea of a seal of authority was added to that, where whenever you would put that melted wax or the wet clay on there, you would stamp it with a ring or with your official stamp that would put your mark on that, okay, on that seal there. Sometimes it was directly on the paper, but more often than not at this time, especially for something like this where we would say 7 seals, it could have been on a tie. So you might see something like this where we've got that tie directly around the scroll, and this is wax. I think all the 3 that I have are wax that was pushed on there. And now you'll notice this doesn't have an emblem in the seals. It's just pushed, okay? So this was literally just more to keep it closed than it was to identify who was going to be able to open it. Or sometimes you might see something, here's a real fancy one, where it was again directly on the paper. You could not open those 2 sides of the scroll without breaking that wax. And you'll see this wax, this happens to be imprinted with the numbers 1 through 7 in the Hebrew language is what this one was imprinted with, the 7 seals there as an example. Or more like what you see sometimes, like I mentioned with that piece of wire around a shipping container, you would see that scroll actually tied with the string, and then that seal is put, well, that ain't gonna work on here. That seal is put around the string so you can't take the string apart without breaking that seal, okay? So, what is the purpose of a seal? We already talked about the first one, right? kind of keep it closed. But beyond that, just keeping it closed, what's the purpose of a seal?
The message hasn't been tampered with.
Okay, that's right. So I think there's two sides of that. To protect the information so only the right person can open it, right? And then everybody else knows, so let's say Sterling sealed a scroll to me, it gets to me, and I see cracks along that wax. What do I know? Somebody opened it, right? And so somebody now has information that was only meant for me. And that's one of the reasons why you would make these really fancy stamps, right? Because how easy is it to, melt wax again and make it look sealed? Well, sure, but if you don't have that exact stamp, it's going to be hard to match that there, okay? So when we look at these scrolls then, what is the problem that chapter 5 opened with? Here's the one on the throne, and he's got this scroll in his right hand, but yet what is true? Yeah, the right person cannot be found. The person who those seals were meant to identify as this is the only person who can open this scroll, no one could be found who would have that authority, who would match that seal there, okay? And it says there, when I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look into it because they were not the right person. There was only one person who was meant to open this scroll, who was meant to be able to break those seals, and who was that? Lion. Right? You said lion. I heard lion first, but then when you said Judah, it tricked. I think both true. Both true. Okay? So, now all of a sudden, who eventually steps forth here? One of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scrolls and its 7 seals. So the right person is finally found. And now we have this great scene where everyone is rejoicing, right? That, hey, we can open the scroll. All right, here we go. And now that's the rest of those other 2 chapters here. So the first 6 seals that are opened. And I found this diagram that does pretty good of drawing it. Anybody remember what the first seal is? The rider on white horse, right? And then the second seal was a rider on red horse, and then black, and then the pale horse. That's right. Now, one of the things you'll notice, and remember this for later, what is very true about those first 4? Very similar, right? They're all the same thing. Now, each one of the riders has a different weapon, and they have if you count scales as a weapon, I guess, and they have a different purpose, it says, but they're all riders on this horse. It's just 4 of the same thing, and they kind of just come boom, 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 these 4 here, okay? And then the next 2 are opened. What was the 5th scroll? That's right, the souls that were underneath that's right, and they're crying out, hey, when are we going to get our justice? How long, right? That's what they're crying out there. And then finally, the 6th one. Remember that? Yeah, it's this big calamity comes, right? The earth quakes, the sun and the moon and the stars. We have these images of stars falling and all those kind of things. So the second 2 here, if we take the first 4, and 5 and 6, much different than the first 4 here. Okay? So now, then of course, we open 6 seals, and then there's this interlude, which is basically chapter 7 here. Okay? So John sees 4 angels, and he sees them where? He's in the presence in the throne room, and it says he looked on. What? The 4 corners of the earth, that's right. So he looks down on the earth and he sees these angels. Now, whether that is, we typically would think of, if you think of someone looking down on the earth, what do you think of? Star Trek, right? Where you're standing out there and you're looking at the globe, and what do you see? This big, rise down, pretty thing, right? We're way out here, right? But probably, what did he see?
Like a map.
What's that?
Could be like a map.
Probably like a map, that's right. And probably not the whole earth, but most likely just kind of that Palestine area, because to the Jews, what was true about that? And even the Christians at this time, that was the world, right? As far as they were concerned. They all lived around that greater Mediterranean area here, okay? And those 4 angels are told to hold back the winds until the servants of God are sealed. And when you see the winds, think destruction, right? They're told to hold back the destruction until we seal these God's people. So then John hears, and I think that's interesting, he did not see, he hears that the number sealed would be 144,000. And Brian talked a little bit about that on Sunday. There's a whole ton of interpretations of what that 144,000 means. We see the same 144,000 referenced in chapter 14. It's an easy way to remember that. 144:14 comes in there. So in chapter 14, we're going to see these same 144,000 again. But there are some interesting things about this 144,000. And I make no claims to be a Hebrew numerologist and to know all those kind of things. But just looking at the list, did you notice anything? I don't remember us talking about this on Sunday. That's kind of different about this list of the tribes. So it says there's going to be 12,000 from each tribe. Did you notice anything weird about that list? What's that? Yeah. It's not a complete list, and there's a tribe added that's never called a tribe anywhere else in the Bible.
And there's one missing.
What's that?
And there's one missing.
There's 2 missing. Yeah. So we have the tribe of Joseph, which is never ever called the tribe of Joseph anywhere. By the time they're tribes, what happens? Joseph's 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, become tribes. So technically, even during the period of the Judges, we talk about the 12 tribes, but how many were there really? There were 13. There were 12 landed tribes, and then who was the other tribe that they were a tribe, but they never got that recognition because they didn't have any land of their own other than cities spread throughout? Levi, that's right. So technically there were 13 tribes. So which 2 are missing? If Joseph is added, which 2 are missing? Dan and Ephraim, that's right, okay? And it's interesting, if you go back and look at the history of those, Dan almost completely wiped out in the book of Judges, right? Remember, they were really bad people. They became really terrible people. So they get almost completely wiped out, and there's really not a lot of mention of them. And even Ephraim is really associated of all the tribes with some wickedness. So then when you look at this list of 12, especially considering we're starting with Judah, and we include Joseph, who was faithful, but not called a tribe anywhere else, what do we start to think this might be? Not what? Not literal, right. Because that list of 12 tribes doesn't match up with anything that even the Jews would have said, that's the 12 tribes of Israel, right? They would have looked at this list and started to think, this is some kind of idealized list of the servants of God that come from Israel here. I don't claim to know what the 144 means. Obviously, 12 tribes represented God's people, and so there's a 12 times 12 to the 1,000th degree. There's some interesting things in there. I'm not going to try to get into that. What I do find is interesting, though, is that he hears there's going to be 144,000, but then he looks, and what does he see? That great multitude, right? Okay. Then he sees the great multitude. So it's always interesting to me when I read this that we see John looking down into the earth, and he sees the 4 corners. Then he hears that those that are going to be sealed are going to be 144,000. But what does he see? He sees this multitude of people coming from all nations. Okay. Are they the same? Are they different groups? When I started reading and looked at that hear versus see, it really seems to me that hear is a description of what he's going to see, which is that coming out. Because after all, we are called what? Are we inheritors of the promise to who? To Abraham. That's right. Okay. That's just my 2 cents about the 144,000. So now we get to chapter 8. So chapter 8, verse 1 reads, "When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour." The first 6 seals, every time a seal was cracked and broken, what happened? Some great thing, right? Either these crazy images of a super powerful rider on his horse who's going to do a lot of destruction, or this physical destruction of the earth shaking, or this terrible crying out of the souls underneath the altar. But all of a sudden, the 7th seal breaks and it's like it is right now. Everybody's just quiet. Why is this kind of strange? I mean, what's the whole book been about so far? Opening the scroll, right? That's what it's been about. We have been waiting for that scroll to be opened. First of all, we couldn't find somebody to open it. And when we finally did find someone to open it, all of heaven just rejoices. Hey, we're going to finally get to open this scroll. And now we open the scroll and, nothing happens. What could that mean? It's kind of strange here. Because if we were thinking about this story, and here is this guy who's got this scroll, and we're all building up to this idea that we got to open this scroll. We want to see what's written on the inside, and on the outside of it, we want to understand. What are we expecting is going to be the great culmination of all of this? It's not a trick question. The opening the scroll, right? I mean, we've had all this drama about all the seals, and we couldn't find someone to open it. We would think this would be the end of the story. But in reality, what do we know? And that's what we find out here. That really, this opening the scroll was only the first step. Where we kind of thought that this was going to be the ultimate, and this was going to be the fulfillment. And if you get caught up in that story, that's sure what you think. But now we get to the opening of this scroll, and it's very anticlimactic. There's just a pause. And everyone in heaven is silent and waiting to see what's going to happen next. So now that the scroll is open, though, what would we expect? Read it. I put it up there. Read it, right? I mean, if I've been sitting there in the throne, and if I'm John, I'm watching all this happen, and every single one of those seals breaking, you're getting a little more excited because we're getting close to the end, and finally that last one opens. Man, I'm just waiting to see what it says in there. But we're not told. As far as we can see, the scroll is never read. The scroll is just open. Okay? And now we're going to see how the first 7 of these lead into another group of 7. This opening the scroll is just the first phase of this story that we find in Revelations here. So we're going to see this pattern of the 7. I called it on here. I sure hope you guys can read that better than I can. The glare from here is terrible. So we've got the pattern of the 7. So this pattern is going to be repeated 4 times, or 3, depending on what you think the pattern applies to. I'll go over that more in the first place. Obviously, the first 7 we run into, we just talked about, it's the 7 what on the scroll? The 7 seals, that's right. So the first group of 7 is going to be 7 seals. Then we're going to see today, in chapter 8, we're going to start the next group of 7. Anybody remember what that's going to be? You should have read that ahead of time, probably. Trumpets, that's right. And then, this is the one that is sometimes not included. But then we're going to see 7 angels that have 7 what? Not yet. The bowls is the one, but there is a chapter in there that has 7 angels that have 7 plagues. Okay? And this is the one that some people don't count, because it doesn't really follow the pattern. And then, of course, the last one is these 7 bowls. So sometimes, chapter 15, which is those 7 plagues, it just literally says, I think there's only 8 verses to chapter 15, where it says, and 7 of those verses is, and the first angel had this plague, the second angel had, and that's just literally all that chapter says. So it doesn't really follow the pattern so much. So what we see a lot of times then is this pattern of 7. So we have the 7 seals first, and the first 6 seals we really have a lot of activity. And then we open the 7th, and there's not really a lot of activity except for what seems to be contained within that 7th seal. Now we can move on to the 7 trumpets. And then we're going to have the 6 trumpets. We have some events there. And then we get to the 7th trumpet, and we kind of have this pause again. And then we get to the 7 bowls, or the 7 plagues are in there, in the way. Okay? So it really seems like the 7th bowl happening is really the culmination of the seals. Okay? So when we look at that then, there's several questions that arise, at least for me, when we look at that there. Do they happen sequentially? Is this really 7 events, and then 7 events, and then 7 events, and then 7 events, maybe there, okay? Or are they all different ways of looking at the same 7 things? The Bible does that a lot, right? Where we would see a certain pattern of events that we're just describing the same events in just different ways. So are the first 7 seals talking about the horses and the destruction and the prayers? Are they really matching up to the 7 trumpets? And then that matches up to the 7 bowls? So you could just say bowl 1, trumpet 1, and horseman 1 are all the same thing? How do you do that? And were the patterns of the other 7 following what was written in the scroll? After all, we don't know what's said in the scroll, right? Maybe the scroll laid down the events that were going to happen. Maybe once the scroll was opened, it said, "Let there come forth 7 angels bearing 7 trumpets." We don't know. Okay? And I'm going to tell you right now, because they asked me to teach just one class, Lawrence and Brian can answer all those questions for you. Okay? Because I don't know. I don't know. All right. Now we mentioned already that there does seem to be this pattern, and we're going to see this right here in chapter 8 to begin with. So when we look at the scrolls and the trumpets, these two follow very, very similar patterns here. The first 4 happen. First 4 scrolls all had, first 4 seals all had horsemen, right? So we had 4 horsemen. We're going to see the first 4 trumpets, they all have something impacts 1/3 of a portion of the realm of nature here. Very similar, almost identical language for each of those 4. Then we have events 5 and 6, which are much different than the first 4. Okay, the first 4 were so similar, we now move on to 5 and 6, which are vastly different. And then we're going to have this, different than the first 4. Then we're going to have this interlude. There's going to be a period of time, there's going to be some verses, there's going to be some stories that happen before then all of a sudden we finally get to the 7th event. And that 7th event is almost going to seem anticlimactic compared to the first 6. So we see this pattern repeated very, very closely between the first 7, the seals, and the second 7, the trumpets here. It's just a almost identical pattern. It's a little bit different when we get to the bowls. And the 7 angels, the 7 plagues, that's why so many people don't count them. They're all the same. They just read through there like that in chapter 15. Okay. Before we actually get into the trumpets, any comments or questions about that? Yeah.
The first part of each of these things, they seem very destructive in nature.
Yes.
You know, talking about throwing fire down on the earth and turning the sea into blood and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And there's even a lot of the same kind of language, right?
Yeah.
Blood coming in, destruction. There's no really conquest mentioned in the stars, but how it impacts the earth and impacts the people that are there and all the creatures, very similar. Yeah, you had a comment back there? I'm just going to tell you I'm deaf as a post, and I forgot my hearing aid, so.
This also kind of reminds me of Jesus last week on earth. We talk about like his last week, and he came into Jerusalem, and it was kind of this anticipation as we're building up to everything that he came here to do. And then he dies on a cross and gets put in a tomb. And the disciples were just, hiding in a house. The impression I get is it's almost like no one's talking there again. And 3 days, 30 minutes, half an hour, that's my American sensitivity put in. But it's the exact same thing. It's like this incredible event leading up to like the purpose for everything. Right. And then just nothing happens.
Yeah. But think about, if you read, I love that comparison, because if you read this first part about the seals, it's building up that expectation. And think about Jesus's apostles even, right? When they came to arrest him that night, what was Peter? Peter's my man, by the way. But what was Peter ready to do? Man, he's ready to fight. He drew that sword, whack, cuts off the guy's ears. Man, he is ready to fight, right? But then what happens? Well, Jesus gets arrested, and they're all going, what is going on? And they're kind of lost. I think that's a great comparison, one I hadn't thought of before. All right, let's get into this story of the 7 trumpets then. So here, chapter 7, beginning in verse 2. Then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it on the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So now we see here that in these first couple verses, the stage is going to be set. We find out what's going to happen, right? So we've already seen all of these angels and all these other beings that are around the throne. Now there's 7 who come forward, and what are they given? Trumpets. Pretty straightforward, right? So they come forward and they give the trumpets. And now you can see all the answers to the questions up there. So then the 8th angel comes forward, and he's bearing this golden censer. What was a censer? I should have found some pictures of that. Was that?
Hold fire.
Hold fire, okay? There were some very basic ones, right? You could have a censer that was just basically a cup at the end of a stick to get fire out, right? But of course, people being people, and even some of God's commands in how to build the temple and the tabernacle, were to build these golden censers. Some of them were posted on stands, some of them were carried, and the whole purpose of that was to offer up what kind of sacrifice? As it mentions here. Incense. Okay? So you would put in these censers that stood on stands. There would kind of be a permanent incense in there, so that the tabernacle would smell like that incense instead of the billion sheep and cows and people that were all around it. And then even in the temple, you would have those same things, censers that had this fragrance of going up to God there with this incense. And then the kind you would carry, we see this all the time in movies, where you've got a priest or somebody carrying, usually on a chain, right? Little bowl of some kind down there with smoke, and you see him swinging it. It's the same thing. Same thing. And that existed in Jewish history as well, where they had some censers that they would carry, that they carried that incense with them there. Okay? So he fills it with incense, and what do we see? Same kind of thing of language we see in Psalms. What is that incense compared to, or what is that incense tied with here? Prayers. With prayers. That's right. So just as that incense in a physical space would rise up and carry that smell, that offering of that smell before God, our prayers are compared to that incense carried up before the throne of God here. Okay? Now, apparently in the story, however much fire he has and the sweet incense that he has, this angel has in that censer, they do their job, they release this fragrant smell, and then it goes out. And we know it goes out because what does he have to do? Yeah, he's got to get some more fire in it, right? So now he goes to that same altar, and remember who's under the altar crying out, "Give us our vengeance." How long? The souls, right? And so he dips that censer into there, fills it to the brim with fire, and then what does he do with it? Yeah, casts it out, right? This is now not a sweet-smelling incense fire. This is the fire of destruction. This is the fire of punishment. And he casts it down upon the earth, and we see almost the exact same thing that we saw from the sixth seal. There's earthquakes and rumbling and lightning and all this terrible destruction. A lot of people think, I don't know that it matters to me one way or the other, that opening of the sixth seal is what the way that earthquake and stuff was caused was by the angel casting the censer. To me, I think there's a break there with the opening of the seventh seal, but some people think that. Okay. So now the stage is set. We've got those 7 angels standing around, and this 8th angel has kind of opened the doorway to earth and has cast down this pre-destruction that's coming. So we'll pick up there in verse 6. I believe it is. The third angel, there we go. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood. And these things were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Then the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from the heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. And the name of the star is Wormwood, which means what? Anybody remember? Bitter. That's right, it means bitter. And a third of the waters became wormwood. And many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night here. Do you see some similarities to the first 4 seals as we read that? First 4 seals were all horsemen that each had their individual area of destruction. The first 4 trumpets are all things that are striking nature and against their individual area that they're going to destroy. Very, very similar wording here. So looking at the first 4 trumpets then, obviously, and this is just going to be regurgitating what we find here because we don't really have a ton of other details here. But trumpet 1, what happens when the angel blows the trumpet, and what element of nature does it strike?
Fire mixed with blood.
Okay, we get hail and fire and like blood that are cast upon what? Element of nature? On the earth, right? Okay? So hail and fire on the earth. And then because of that, it says 1/3 of what happens? 1/3 of the trees and 1/3 of the land, and they just get burned up, right? And actually it says all the grass and all the little bushes get burned up here. Okay? The second trumpet then, what is the thing that happens and what is it cast against? What area of nature?
The mountain to the sea.
Some fiery mountain that gets cast against the sea. Okay? And again, what do we see?
Turned into blood.
There's blood in the sea, that's right. But how much of the sea? third. We have this weird number, right? So 1/3 becomes blood, which means 1/3 of the sea creatures die, and 1/3 of all of the ships are destroyed here. Okay. Trumpet number 3, same question. What falls or what object, and what does this one hit against? A star, and it hits against the rivers. That's right. So think about the fiery mountain hit the salt water, and now the star hits the fresh water, right? So it comes down, and so this star falls into the river. It's a star that is called wormwood. It's called bitter. That becomes the name here. Okay? And 1/3 of all of the rivers become bitter, undrinkable. And for the first time we really see here, what are we specifically told happens to people? A whole bunch of them die, right? We weren't told that in the first two. I guess we could probably assume that if 1/3 of all ships were destroyed, that whoever was crewing those ships probably went with them. And in the 4th trumpet here, the lights of the sky are struck. Okay? And so again, we have this idea of 1/3. So 1/3 of the sun's light is cast out, and 1/3 of the moon's light, and 1/3 of the light that comes from the stars is dim. There's some dispute here about, does it mean that like for 1/3 of the day the sun was dark, or did the sun only shine at 2/3 power? We don't really know. And it doesn't matter, because what is, from these entire first 4 then, just looking at them together, again, what is the imagery that we have here?
Destruction.
Sorry?
Destruction.
Yeah, destruction, and against all of nature, right? Is there any kind of realm that didn't get hit here? The land, the salt water, the fresh water, even the very sky are being assaulted in this terrible sense of destruction that's coming down from these trumpets here. Now, to me, one of the most confusing parts of Revelation, because it's all about numbers, and I already told you I'm not a numerologist. There's something in me that doesn't like this. Because there's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and then another 1/3. If there had just been 3 things, and each third of them had happened, and that would kind of, together they would signify complete destruction. But now we get 1 1/3 destruction here. I'm not really sure what that means. A lot of people will try to tell you in commentaries what they think it means. The only solution that I've ever read or come to believe I think makes the most sense is that if it had just stopped at 3 1/3, we would say there's still 2/3 left, right? But he goes even beyond that. So even beyond complete destruction, we're going to add another one on top of that. There's no escaping that. Richard?
I have no idea whether this makes any sense, but just thinking about, I deal with numbers and finance things all the time, and 30% or 33% is a meaningful number,
Yeah.
but it's less than half. And so like when I see that number, I think of, it's not some, it's not a few, it's a meaningful number, but it's not the majority. And so like, you know, you could have used a majority, you could use a half, and so I just wonder if it's implying it's substantial, but not a majority.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely not all, right? Not all of any one element is destroyed here, you know, but it's significant. Yeah, go ahead.
That's interesting to me, like you get to the end of this, chapter 9, verse 20, and it kind of gives maybe one of the reasons. Obviously, this is for the retribution, this is for wrath. But there's also another element here, and that is a prod to repentance. It says, the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship them. You know, they didn't repent. For all this, they still didn't repent. Then you just sneak peek ahead, and you look at verse 14 and 10. It talks about those in the kingdom of the beast, and it says, you know, to them the wrath of God is poured out full strength. And then we see the bowl judgments where just that is happening.
Yeah.
The wrath of God is being poured out full strength. So this is like building up to something bigger, but it was, part of this was giving them one more opportunity to repent, and they still wouldn't. So we didn't completely destroy them. We're trying still to turn them, but it's not going to work.
Yeah. when I read that part of chapter 9, which we're not supposed to cover, by the way, so blah, blah, blah. But when I read that first part of chapter 9, I always think of the end of the nation of Jerusalem in, 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, right? When you read that story, and he's saying, they're the worst passages in the Bible, the saddest passages in the Bible. God for years sent his prophets to his people, trying to get them to repent, but what did they do? They wouldn't listen, and they killed the prophets, and they turned away from God, and they turned to the idols. So God finally gets to the point where he says, I have to do what? We got to wipe it clean, right? We got to get you all out of here. Even the ground itself is going to be raised so that there can be a fresh start. I think of that a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, these are letters that were sent out to the churches, and so many of them Jewish churches. 3 of these are like the plagues of
Yeah.
Egypt. So if they go back and look at their history, which would go back to the whole repentance thing, trying to, it'd be reading their history again.
For sure. Yeah. Any Jew reading this one immediately would bring up ideas of the plagues. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, on that topic, there's one story in the Bible that includes everything that comes from the 6th seal, the censers, the altar, the fire, the earthquakes, and that's Korah's rebellion.
Yeah.
Korah's rebellion has every single element of that piece in it, and it's much the same thing that Jews in the first century would have asserted.
Yeah.
The whole congregation is holy. We're all people, and that's God's rebuke of those people. So I think it's one of those things like Brian and Lawrence have talked about, is without referencing a story, they're referencing a story.
That's right. Without specifically calling it out, leaving those clues for people to pick up on those signs. That's right. That's right. Okay. So, we get done with these 4 trumpets, and then we end chapter 8 with this verse here. And then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew directly overhead, Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, at the blast of the other trumpets that the 3 angels are about to blow. Here we go. You thought those first 4 were bad? Guess what? The next 3 that are coming, they're going to be even worse. Which follows that same pattern we saw in the seals, right? The first 4 were bad, but then 5, we have this terrible scene of martyrs killed and their souls are under the altar, and then 6, this terrible earthquake and lightning and shattering, and the sun goes dark and all these kind of things. And same thing here. The first 4, they all followed this pattern, God showing his power and that he was going to have to, inflict damage upon the land, upon the sea, upon the very sky to get this balanced out. But look out, because here come the next 3 trumpets, which we really know the 7th trumpet is about the 7 what? Bowls, which are even worse, right? They just get even worse. Okay? All right. Now, if my clock in here is right, we have 30 seconds left before that bell rings. Any other comments or questions? Man, could have timed that better. Lawrence and Brian live up to that.